could very well be, the fire chief or myself, or park operations, depending on what the area is. It'll make it to the correct person, and then we could, begin that dialogue and make that a continual and ongoing dialogue.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks for that, Patrick, and thanks for that great feedback. Brian?
Yes.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I was just wondering, how does this GIS work in relation to the new CAL FIRE risk assessment maps that came down, in the last year?
Can you repeat the question? I'm not sure I understood.
So CAL FIRE dropped a whole bunch of risk assessment maps that they changed the classifications of things, and I was just wondering, how can you talk about how your work here is integrated or yet to be integrated with the CAL FIRE stuff?
I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I mean, I know we're coordinating with them on a regular basis. They funded RMAP, but how they're using our mapping to inform their process, I'm not exactly sure. And maybe our fire chief can answer that.
Kari Haley, Assistant Fire Chief. It's an additional tool to the CAL FIRE SRA and LRA maps. So our high resolution vegetation mapping is an additional tool available for both counties. All these maps focus on different priorities, and ours is another tool that'll benefit not just a district, but any agency in Alameda and Contra Costa County.
Thank
you. Okay, moving on to our next mitigation action.
Thank you, Katie. Allison Brooks, AGM for External Affairs, and it came up, how do you engage with us? We are accessible. There's ways to submit information, requests information, certainly reach out to us individually. We use a lot of mechanisms to educate and raise awareness on hazard issues, whether it's postcards like this, whether it's every other month we send out, if you're familiar with the Regional in Nature publication, we have a monthly e-newsletter where we share a lot of information about wildfire safety and the work of public safety and the other divisions across the Park District. You can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. And we also use in real time when there is an event. We will post it, immediately up on the website. Say if there's a park closure due to an event or some other hazard, we'll also use social media. In 2024, in the winter, we had a media campaign to promote the fuel reduction projects, and like I said, we post extreme weather warnings on social media and our website, and we reach thousands of folks. If you're not getting information, please reach out and we'll make sure that you are receiving the information. And then looking ahead, I did want to mention the sea level rise work that's underway also at the district that Devin's leading up through planning, whether the Hazard Shoreline Adaptation Master Plan, the Hayward Shoreline Adaptation Master Plan, and also as we're updating our district plan, hopefully you've been able to respond to the district plan. We're looking for input, but this is going to be a process where we're working with communities across Alameda and Contra Costa County to think about how we're as a park district engaging on climate change hazard issues moving forward, and how we prioritize our efforts to address the hazards we know are kind of increasing and are impacting, our resources and our facilities and surrounding communities. So happy to answer any questions. All right. How's everybody doing?
Maybe this is going to come up later, but we are also developing a resilient shoreline plan in Contra Costa County. If
Yes.
you're not in contact, let me know and I'll connect you with them.
Okay. Chris is going to provide us the update on our green projects, including our greenhouse gas reduction project.
So this is the implementation of green projects relating to our fleet and equipment program. The original scope of work was to replace 158 vehicles with improved technology and 13 EV charging stations. So for the 158, we are in progress. We have an estimated completion date of 2027 with an estimated cost of $13.5 million. So to date, we have replaced 86 vehicles and pieces of equipment with green alternatives. We have 16 more, we've been to this point. We have 42 for improved fuel mileage and 16 more that are pending this year. And then also 44 for alternative fuels and 13 more pending this year. Since 22, we've installed 4 electric vehicle stations, and we have further installations planned that are actually, some are, the Peralta Oaks North is underway here. Our South County Courtyard has charging stations pending, our Tilden Corporation Yard, and our Tidewater location. We are also regularly looking at vehicle assessments within our fleet for replacement when there are suitable alternatives. We did talk slightly about a revision to kind of replace the realities of vehicle manufacturing has shifted a little bit, and changes in technology have really made some opportunities more capable. And so we have a target goal for smaller engine size to target goals for vehicles with improved fuel mileage. So of the 158 that were originally targeted, 22 have opportunities to be downsized in engine, and 35 have been identified for conversion to an alternative fuel type. So perhaps in the original formulation, the 158 might have been a bit of a high guess. So, but this is something that is going to be ongoing with our green fleet initiatives.
Okay, any questions? Okay, handing off to Devin for the Hayward Shoreline update.
Yes, thank you, Katie. Again, I'm Devin Reef, Principal Planner at the East Bay Regional Park District. Letting everyone know that the East Bay Regional Park District is the managing agency for HASPA, or the Hayward Area Shoreline Planning Agency, which is a 55-year-old joint powers authority, which is made up of the East Bay Regional Park District, the City of Hayward, the Hayward Area Rec and Park District, and the Alameda County Mosquito Abatement District. The mission of HASPA is to protect the Hayward shoreline from the effects of sea level rise. And in 2021, HASPA adopted the Hayward Shoreline Master Plan, which is a 30-year project plan for 20 different capital projects, which will protect the shoreline from sea level rise. And a new grant received recently will pay for an implementation program for the plan. And one project that is moving forward into final permitting and design is the East Bay Regional Park District's Hayward Marsh Restoration. And Chris Barton is here to speak about that as well.
Good morning, Chris Barton, East Bay Regional Park District Restoration Projects Manager. The Restore Hayward Marsh project is a project to address some long-standing water quality and wildlife management issue at a former wastewater treatment facility. The project will also address flooding along the San Francisco Bay Trail and allow the Park District to control water levels adjacent to the urban open space interface. The project currently is near the end of the design, development, and permitting phase, and will be ready for implementation in 2026.
Thank you, Devin and Chris. Does anyone have any questions?
I guess I'm Amber Evans, City of Emeryville. Are there other initiatives you see as applicable from the lessons that you've learned for that elsewhere in the district? And what would be the process for cross-fertilization to other areas?
Yes, thank you for that question. The HASPA master plan was really ahead of its time. It was paid for with a grant from Caltrans and ahead of its time. Now that the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission has the Regional Shoreline Adaptation Program, which Jody was just mentioning, there's a lot of lessons that those designers were looking at in the HASPA master plan. So we are open both at HASPA and at the Park District to collaborating with any agency or city or jurisdiction that is interested in speaking more about the Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plan. And there are ideas and resources in the HASPA master plan that could be applicable.
I guess a follow-up question. It seems notable that you were the lead in this project. And do you see other instances or why that made sense? Or could you imagine taking the lead in other projects along the shoreline?
Well, HASPA specifically has a jurisdiction, which is the 3 or 4 miles of the Hayward shoreline. HASPA was interested in expanding that jurisdiction, but really to neighboring counties, or neighboring cities and unincorporated Alameda County. I think there is a lot of regional discussion about who leads capital projects, individual capital projects, once they've been identified and eventually designed and permitted. And that's certainly a larger question that the Park District wants to be part of.
Did HASPA or the East Bay Regional Parks, was there any emergency notification during the whole tsunami last month? I was just out of curiosity. We were worried about the homeless population that might be living down there. So I was just curious what you guys have come across or what was done.
Yeah, I can speak for HASPA that there was we don't have an emergency contact system. So HASPA as an agency didn't warn anyone, but it's possible the Park District, the East Bay Regional Park District, had some messaging around that.
Okay. I think it's something to note of like how that works in the future. I think we're kind of all looking at each other in response to your question. And so I think we'll definitely get back into that of how we're handling the notifications for when there are events like tsunamis on our shorelines.
That one was a unique one. It was really a small window when it was noted like an evacuation or a warning, right?
Yeah, it got put out by Cal OES or by Alameda County OES,
right,
as a warning. And then the next step for us would have been to send HPD out to kind of warn the shoreline because we were worried about the homeless population, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, I was just curious. Wasn't meant to ball anything up. I was just curious as to if there was any notification by HASPA or.
Yeah, I don't think we put something up on our website when that happened. Yeah. It was the one day my daughter decided to go to the beach, though, with her friends for a sleepover. And I was like, of all the days, this was the day you decide to have a bonfire at the beach. So it was, I had my own notification system going on.
Okay, moving on to our next item, Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison Rowe, Rangeland Specialist. So this action item is really focuses on the water sources for our livestock grazing program. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we graze about 86,000 acres in Alameda and Contra Costa County, primarily with cattle. And in order to efficiently graze, we need adequate water sources. So we've been implementing dozens of projects throughout the years and providing water sources, and that's through municipal systems. So we've been tapping into water meters when possible, new wells, which has been less successful, and utilizing the springs that are on the properties themselves. And it's ongoing. We do this every year. We make these improvements and new projects, and it costs about $400,000 a year. But I will say that we do a lot of this work with our grazing tenants and in partnership with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, who provide technical and financial assistance. And then also, depending on the project, we also work with the local resource conservation districts that provide us programmatic permitting for when we implement these projects. And it also includes the restoration of livestock ponds, which are pretty critical to move cattle around. And we have over 600, so they're a pretty important landscape feature. Next slide. Oh, thank you. And these are just some of the accomplishments. We've been working in multiple parks, implementing these water sources. At Brushy Peak, we put a new water meter. Mission Peak, some of them are extension of some existing infrastructure, and we've also been restoring ponds as well, probably about 3 to 5 a year. Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. How do you manage the stock in relationship to the creeks that are on the park and water quality and so forth?
So we only have a small subset of creeks that tend to be year round that are maybe excluded from livestock, but our livestock do have access to seasonal creeks and whatnot. So they do have access to seek shade, maybe a drink of water, but by providing these troughs that are in the uplands away from these water courses, it really does help with the animal distribution and getting the cattle out of these natural water systems and into the grasslands where the troughs are.
Okay, thank you, Allison. Now I'll hand over to Ren to talk about the earthquake actions.
Thank you. So yes, we are currently renovating a building across the street for administrative office space. And part of that is because of our proximity to the Hayward Fault and the fact that this building is going to be our essential services building. We are currently in the process of renovating it all, doing seismic upgrades. As you can see in this bottom picture, the dampers that we're installing or that are being installed are quite large. And so we are currently working on that. The completion for that is hopefully next fall in terms of getting that building done. The building total cost for that is $76 million. I don't have the line item for the seismic upgrades. It's a full renovation of the building. I can look that up, but I don't have that in front of me right now, unfortunately. And that's that slide. And then looking forward, like I said, here's another picture that shows another area where those dampers are. It's that spot right in the open window. So we're focusing on completing that building. And then once we complete that, we are going to look at evaluations for the next building assessments. As shown in the spreadsheet that was the handout. It talks about some of the buildings that are highlighted. I think we need to relook at that because per Katie Hornbeck's update earlier, the bridge to Fire Station 2 has been lifted. And so it's currently not in use. And so we have to look at what buildings are next high priority. So that once we complete that building, or probably in conjunction for the next year, we'll look at what building is most important for seismic evaluation and then move forward with that. Happy to answer any questions.
This might not be for you, Ren, but Jody London again. Are you looking at places where people can go during a disaster when they can't be at home? Like we're trying to set up resilience hubs. We're starting to think about that. And one of the reasons I wanted to come today was to hear if you all were working on that, and whether that was an area for collaboration.
I can't speak to that. I don't, my purview is design and construction, so capital
All
improvement.
right, I was just curious because you mentioned the public safety.
Yeah, so it will be essential services, but I think that's more for operations for.
Yeah, well, this isn't a
emergency.
great location for people to gather
Yeah,
because it's
no,
hard to get here.
yeah. So I don't know if any of my colleagues on the panel have any.
I don't think I have an immediate response for you, but we're going to note it down and
Great.
look
Thanks.
at. We don't have any active projects looking at resilience hubs at this point, but it's something we do, we'll consider as part of our planning process going forward.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and I think it'd be if you haven't filled out the district plan kind of survey that we have out there right now, and we'll share that with everybody that was invited to the meeting. I do encourage you to fill that out and put your feedback on issues a district should be considering for the future. Next is Ren again.
Well, Matt Grawl, again, from Stewardship, I'll kick this one off just because the Stewardship Department did a dredging and feasibility study for Lake Temescal in 2019. And that identified the costs at the bottom as potential to dredge Lake Temescal of between 20 and 24 million. As we started looking at that at the conceptual level and trying to looking at similar projects, we think the costs really could be much higher than that. So now we're thinking it could be closer to 50 to 60 million dollars to dredge Lake Temescal. It's a very important area for recreation and also does provide some good water storage, but it's a significantly there's been significant sedimentation since it was first built. So at one point, the lake used to be more than 60 feet. Now the deepest part is around 17 feet. And the average depth is between 7 to 9 feet on different topographic assessments we have. And so with some challenges we've been having with that increased sedimentation, the sedimentation over the years has been water quality issues. And so to manage some of those water quality issues, we have recently installed an oxygenation system to better oxygenate the water and try to reduce the nutrient formation and reduce harmful algal blooms. And then Ren can talk about some other things we're looking to some more near-term or ways to alternatives since the dredging is going to be so expensive. What are some other options we can look at? But I know one question we might get is why is it so expensive? And it's mainly because there's the sediment from the lake would have to be trucked out of there and trucked somewhere else. So it's really the trucking costs to transport the sediment to another location that drives the cost.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah. So as Matt said, the sediment study from 2019 highlighted a full dredge. And so in terms of the ultimate cost of that, knowing that it's very high, we are taking that as a lead and looking into reaching out. There's been a lot of community engagement with this project as well. So next steps will be to see what kind of short-term actions we can do, where we have an image here that shows some concepts for some sediment enlargements from that 2019 plan. So pursuing some shorter term, possibly looking at the feasibility of these, but also engaging with a longer term, not a longer term, but a more of a planning process again to revisit that 2019 and see what kind of discrete actions or smaller scopes of work could happen as a longer term in conjunction with the short term, maybe potential sediment bonds, the oxygenation that Matt spoke about, and see where we can have maybe not this $40 million whole dredge, but more discrete actions based on the services or amenities that the lake provides. So in other words, if it's more swimming, how to increase the water quality, if it's fishing, how to maybe dredge certain areas, if it's feasible to provide for more depth of water. But those are kind of the next steps in terms of, since we don't have funding for a full dredge, and just not only to back up Matt's statement is just that it's in a tight area. And so when you dredge that out, it'll be wet, all that material. You either have to lay it out to dry or you have to put it in trucks with visqueen, and that costs costly. And then I realize there's a freeway there, but there are many logistical problems in terms of dredging that lake. So we're trying to find smaller actions that would help to restore that water quality and improve Lake Temescal.
Amber Evans, City of Emeryville. When they say there are no dumb questions. It seems, so in Emeryville, we're at the other end of Temescal Creek. Our hazard mitigation plan has the failure of that dam as one of our risks. And so I'm just wondering, given that price tag, it seems like it might be delayed a while. There's a headline, I don't know if people have seen it, about everybody's trying to figure out how to do a complicated, difficult project. And some beavers moved into the area and fixed the problem before the project was done. And I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity for something like out of the box here, habitat, trees, water, watershed, improvement, amazing, do something different. I'll just throw it out as a thought to think about in the future. And then the other thought is on sedimentation. Devin and I are all talking about sedimentation in shoreline and the lack thereof, and Army Corps is spraying it on different areas by micro layers. And so if there was just some way, and Temescal Creek seems very complicated way because there's a lot of culverts, I know, in Emeryville, but maybe another creek or something that it could be brought down and maybe something innovative. And I'm a city planner. I don't know anything about it. I'm just going to throw out ideas because it feels like maybe some new ideas could help this conversation, at least enliven it for us around the table as we are staring at each other looking uncomfortable. So I just thought I'd throw some things out there, see where it got us. Thank you.
Well, Matt Grawl, just respond to that. I mean, we've been thinking about similar things because, I mean, ultimately that sediment should be down in the Emeryville Crescent, and that should be feeding those mud flats in those areas. So I think we've talked at high levels to the Coastal Conservancy, to the Army Corps, to others about just that need. There isn't an easy solution. I mean, if there was an easy way just to pipe it down there, it'd be, but I think with all the highways and, like you said, the extensive culvert system, it's not as simple as just letting it go, and down there, because there's just all this infrastructure in between the Lake Temescal and the Emeryville Crescent. But that's ultimately would be the ideal scenario if we could find a way to do that. So I think we're talking about it, but we don't have any clear option to pursue as a discrete project right now. But it's something we should keep thinking about, though. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to flood and storm mitigation inland areas. Chris?
So this action is it's about repairing areas that were hit by these storms and restoring the vulnerable areas that were impacted from it. This is an ongoing process. I think in one of the first slides mentioned there were 150 sites that were affected by the storms, and we do have a process for managing this. Some of the high level items that we've hit to date include replacing an embankment on the road to Bort Meadow and Anthony Chabot, repairing Marcial Road, replacing an embankment on Brandon Trail, replacing fire roads and spillways in Contra Loma, replacing a footbridge in Don Castro, and then also highlighting a berm washout in Vasco. The picture that you're seeing there is the replacement of one of our access roads on the Briones Valley Trail, and that's an articulating ford. We do have activities planned for next year, specifically related to the storm for repairing that road headwall and embankment in Leona Canyon. And we're going to continue to assess these projects from the 23 storms and some of them from the 2017 as well. But it is an ongoing process that we do with our staff as we manage these things. So.
Okay, and next item.
This is also one that we're kind of handling in staff. Actually, it's a similar work body, similar group. And it's replacing some of these older and undersized culverts with larger, more engineered culverts. This is also in progress, and this is something that we do annually, very specifically related to the 23 storms. We do have a fund established for $300,000 for replacements of these culverts. We have a process where these projects are looked at mostly from operations staff because they're the folks that are out in the fields across all the parks, and they help us prioritize which ones are, key for access and use or environmental impact. And then our construction crews work with both our stewardship department to permit these projects, and then if needed, as well as our design and construction folks to come up with any engineering prescriptions that are needed. You can see that we've done a number of culverts in Anthony Chabot, Diablo Foothills, Cole Canyon, and Lake Chabot. The picture that you're seeing there is the replacement of a 60-inch culvert in Lake Chabot. And very specifically next year, we do have activities planned in Tilden. And as I said before, so we have this permitting process and review process that we'll be replacing a number of culverts next year as well. We're in currently the construction window for these things, so a number of these are going on now, but we'll be reviewing and intaking more each year as we go through this.
Any questions for Chris? Okay, thank you. Moving on to action item 13, the vegetation management and fuels reduction projects.
Kari Haley, Assistant Fire Chief. I'm going to put together some context of that plan that we're going to talk about, which is the wildfire hazard and fuels reduction plan. In 1991, when we had our devastating Oakland Hills fire, or also referred to as the tunnel fire, the district needed to have a fuels plan where we could target the highest hazard areas of the district's land. And unfortunately, from Castro Valley all the way out to Richmond, those ridgeline parks, those are those areas. Those areas are the pathway of the Diablo winds and the same footprint that's had historic fires since the 1800s. And right now we're on a pathway we've not had, well, I don't want to go there, but before 1991, on average of 25, about every 25 years, we would have a devastating, catastrophic wildfire in the Oakland Berkeley Hills. Next slide, please. So what have we done to mitigate that hazard there? That plan allowed us to have FEMA and CEQA, allowed us to have CEQA permitting for that area and NEPA permitting for that area, which allowed us to apply for state funds and FEMA funds. Back in 2015, we applied for our first FEMA grant, which was the FEMA HMGP grant. At that time, it was a big number, $3.5 million. It allowed our fuels management program to get started, and it started with a pretty modest staff. It covered 11 parks all the way from Castro Valley, parks like Lake Chabot, parks in the Oakland Hills, Redwood, Anthony Chabot, Claremont Canyon, all the way out to Richmond, Miller Knox, Wildcat Canyon, those ridgeline parks. Since then, just to give you a little background, we have accomplished 30 various grants, and we have spent $45 million between grants and park district funds since 2015 in those parks. We have been aggressively applying for grants. At one point, we had $32 million in pending grant applications. If we look at some of the grants that are listed here for the accomplishments, the original one was 3.5 million. And we completed that one last year in 2024. And then we have the FEMA PDM. That one focused on Tilden and Sibley and Wildcat. That was 1.5 from FEMA with a $500,000 match from the Park District. Since then, we've done collaborative grants with other agencies. We've been extremely successful with our grants, and it's because we have a full team of support to accomplish this work, everything from public affairs to grants to our government affairs department. And all those departments allow us to be very efficient and successful with accomplishing grants. because you need funding to do the work, but then the funding doesn't get the money or doesn't get the work done alone. You need people to get the work done. So on that note, our staffing has significantly increased in the last 6 years. We've acquired a fuels crew with a total of 16 members. We started off with one fuels reduction coordinator, and that position is a position that works with contractors doing fuels work. And at the time, we were doing about $1.2 million a year. Today, we have 5 of those positions. We literally this year just got another fuels reduction coordinator position because we've gotten more funding. So just to highlight some of that funding, we received this year alone, $8.9 million in funding in grants, and it came along with another $2 million from the district in matching. So that's $10.9 million in funding. And so I told you that in 2015, the 3.5 million was a big number. And recently we have just been accomplishing a lot to be able to mitigate the fuels in this high hazard area. Just to highlight additional accomplishments, last year through government affairs, we secured $10 million that we were able to put to work in Anthony Chabot, mitigating one of the highest or the largest eucalyptus plantation in Northern California. And through that work, we're not just mitigating fuels, we're not just taking care of fire hazard, we're also treating forest health. So if the forest is healthier, when you have healthy trees, they're not dying. And when you have dead trees, you have fire hazard. So our work has accomplished that. And we've been able to do innovative processes through our work. Some of you may have heard of the biochar that we were utilizing on one of our projects, where we were processing all the fuels from the biomass on site, turning it into biochar instead of trucking it all the way out to Sacramento to the cogen facilities, and reusing that biochar on Park District land for beneficial uses. So the work is taking care of the fire mitigation in the highest areas of the Park District. It's also making the forest more fire resilient, and we're doing efforts to combat climate change by creative, innovative processes like using biochar. It's the end of that update.
Okay, any questions on this one?
We did. So we have a fuels crew, a 16-person crew. Their name is the Diablos, and they focus on fuels management. They can do maintenance. So maintaining the areas that we're initially treating through all this grant work, and they can mobilize very quickly for us. So it's an important part of our plan, because the contractors, we have a system where we can use a task order and get work within a week. Obviously, our RFPs take a little bit longer, around 2 months, but our fuels crew, we can mobilize instantly. So if we do get complaints or concerns from the public, or just our own concerns, that crew can be mobilized instantly to mitigate those issues. It's a separate one, but we do work collaboratively with that crew. And I know what crew you're referring to, and also the crew that's in Contra Costa County, since we're in both counties. No. Well, you can't have ours.
First, a question. I guess I don't know what biochar is and would love to little more about what its use is. Explain that.
Yeah, it's a process. So we have a carbonizer, which is this large piece of equipment. It looks like the back of a semi truck, like a big box. It has an engine, and it creates fire and heat. It burns it at a high temperature. We literally can imagine taking an entire tree, but in our case, hundreds of trees, and placing them in this carbonizer, and then it burns it at a high rate. It's so efficient, it burns 90% of the biomass, and the 10% that's left of that is biochar. The simplest way to explain it is when you have a campfire and you put out the fire and there's a little charcoal black substance, that's pretty much biochar, except ours is more refined, and it's more complex, and it has abilities to absorb. And so for us, when we reuse it in parkland, in areas where there's erosion, it has the ability to absorb water, absorb nutrients, and help plant regrowth. And so we took eucalyptus trees that, no surprise, doesn't have lots of fans, but there are some fans of those trees out there. Trust me, I am aware of them. But most people would be happy if those trees were not here. And so they don't have a large use except for shipping them to Sacramento to cogeneration facilities to burn as energy.
And then I guess my comment is I saw a presentation in Solano County where they were using an application for eucalyptus trees to be put on their sides, strapped down, and used for sea level rise protection. And with your shoreline parks and your need to get trees down and out, and a costly location to truck them to, maybe there's another, using your model of using them on the parks, another model for using them within Sylvia McLaughlin and your other shoreline parks. I'll suggest that.
Okay. Thank you for that. Next update on tree dieback and hazardous trees abatement plans. Patrick?
So action 14, continued implementation of the EBRPD tree dieback and hazardous trees abatement plans and programs. I'm going to speak first, and then I'll have the Robert Kennedy from operations speak towards the hazard tree program. So this action does tie hand in hand from the fire department standpoint with our fire hazard mitigation program and our fuels management program. So quite a bit of what Chief recently spoke to kind of ties in with this as far as our wildfire hazard reduction resource management plan, our fuels team, and our fuels program, and the identified treatment areas along with our different priorities and projects as we move through and get grants and funding and perform different projects that both create resiliency in our forest as well as reduce the wildfire hazard risk. And we had been working for quite some time, since 2015, working through this FEMA grant from the HMGP grant program in multiple parks throughout the 17 park covered wildfire hazard reduction resource management plan. And in 2020, it was clearly noted that due to drought, climate change, we were starting to notice and experience and see large scale tree die-off and tree mortality throughout our parks, varying species, varying locations. And at that time as well too, federal and state authorities and land managers were noting similar dieback and die-off, primarily in our softwood forest due to beetle kill, bug kill, which resulted in some very large scale fires in the Sierra Nevadas, as well as locally, more so for us, the non-indigenous or non-native species of trees that have been planted throughout our parklands, one of which the eucalyptus, blue gum eucalyptus, acacia species, multiple acacia species, and then a lot of the different conifers that have been planted. So as part of that immediate need to get that work done, we were able to secure funding to go in and treat what was identified as about 1,900 acres initially of tree dieback and mortality throughout our parks. We secured funding to target the highest risk area, which was in Anthony Chabot as well as in Tilden. And with that funding, we've been able to date to treat 686 acres of that eucalyptus forest, utilizing those novel methods such as the carbonizer to create biochar to reduce the impacts of that work on our towards increasing the impacts of climate change long term. That project, along with the Tilden dieback project, was performed. That was in 2023, and removed a large amount of dead and dying pine trees in the Tilden area along one of our primary evacuation routes that we identified earlier. In addition to that, we've continued to secure more funding through FEMA, through our direct allocations, in order to continue and treat more acres out in Anthony Chabot. So ongoing activities are to continue to treat those eucalyptus forests where we haven't been able to get any funding to perform that work. That's going to be taking place here shortly this year. We're going to have another, I believe, about 120 acres of eucalyptus thinned and treated. Long-term impacts of this work, we're not removing each and every single tree. We're thinning the trees to make it so that overstocking in resource scarcity, should we enter into another period of drought, aren't going to be an issue and cause this issue once again. And with this tree mortality and the dieback, one of the issues is that as the trees, if they don't die altogether, they're actually dying back from limbs, branches, and they will, add to the fuel loading on the forest floor, and the eventuality or possibility of catastrophic stand replacing fire with large amounts of CO2 and emissions, and as well as impacts on the adjacent communities. So we're prioritizing the maintenance of those areas where we went through and treated. At this point, our workflow and our work plan really is moving in that maintenance direction for these areas that we've been able to treat with the funding over the last number of years. Ongoing, we plan to continue to monitor the forest health in these areas and in new areas, as well as throughout the district, as well as work with our stewardship counterparts in identifying and deploying rapid response, I would say, but identification and response to new and incoming issues that may cause other dieback or die-off issues, as far as different introduced beetle species, as well as sudden oak death syndrome and the newly identified NA2, which is now out and within our parklands that could cause more mortality of some of our native species. And I'll go ahead and pass it over to Robert as far as the hazard tree program and the ongoing removal of hazardous trees throughout our park.
Thanks, Patrick. You're going to hear a reoccurring theme with park operations. We've got this annual program where we identify, monitor, and remove hazardous trees throughout the district. Again, we have 283 employees. Roughly half of them have been trained in tree felling, but those are nominal sized trees. So we're not going after the big guys. That's dealt with through our hazardous tree contracts process. Roughly $500,000 is spent annually to be able to identify and remove hazardous trees that have target sites. And so those trees, again, are spread throughout those 73 different parks, 2 different counties in the district. We're looking at staging areas, different district facilities, picnic sites, trails, and adjacent properties, because we do have that urban parkland interface. And so when we identify a tree that needs to be removed, we normally contract out the larger scale trees. The smaller stuff is taken on by our park staff. We do also work in coordination with stewardship just to make sure that any herbicide applications to the root balls that are left follow, our protocols with the use of those specifically identified herbicides just to prevent regrowth, and then also not leave, coined a new term from my partner, Patrick McIntyre, jackpots throughout the park district, because the less fuel that we can have out in the field, the safer our communities can be. And so again, we're constantly trying to evolve our practices when it comes to hazard mitigation and removal, and our staff do a wonderful job doing that. But again, it's just the state of the district. Patrick talked about the dieback, and it's just hard to keep up. But as our practices evolve, as risks present themselves, our staff will identify, monitor, and remove on an annual basis.
And one thing to note, we have actually been doing our best to track how many dead or compromised dying trees that we've removed through these projects, and it's 240,000 trees over the last couple of years. So kind of a staggering number, to be honest.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Next item, defensible spaces and ignition resistant construction projects.
Ari Haley, Assistant Fire Chief. First, I want to start with the topic of defensible space. Just give the group here and audience current information, some of the most current information out of the Palisade fires. The LA fires is how important defensible space is, not just for defending homes, but also for saving people's lives. And the Park District has been focused on what I'll share shortly, what we consider defensible space, and trying to do our part, but it's a true collaborative effort that we need everybody to do their part to make sure that we can protect homes and lives and stop these catastrophic fires from going from structure to structure. And defensible space in zone 0, which is that first 5 feet from your home, is extremely important work to stop embers from igniting. Next slide, please. What we consider defensible space is 2 different terms, internally versus externally. If you imagine the Park District, our defensible space as landowners is our land within 100 feet of the public's homes, or roadways that we consider strategic routes to have park users to egress out of, or for emergency vehicles to enter through. So we've been focused on those areas within 100 feet of our neighbors' homes in our fuels plan that we talked about earlier. And so the funding that we've been utilizing since 2015, majority of that work is focused in those areas. We call them recommended treatment areas, or RTAs. And if you really look at it from a big picture and you see these RTAs on a map, you would notice a pattern, and that pattern is that they are adjacent to people's homes, those high value assets adjacent to Park District land. So we have been very successfully treating and mitigating fuels adjacent to people's homes since 2015. Like I just said earlier, last year alone, we had an additional funding of 10 million from a Cal Recycle. Direct funding this year between our own agencies' resources and grant funding, $10.9 million for that work. So we've been very focused on doing our part to make not just our parks resilient, but to also make sure that neighbors adjacent to Park District land hopefully don't have concern, or at least as much concern, because they see the Park District is set up to do their part and is very successful with what we've accomplished. Traditionally, defensible space is also zone 0, 1, and 2 within the perimeter of your home. And we, in 2023, created our own defensible space plan for our internal structures. And we had adopted zone 0 back a couple of years ago, so 2023. So we have been focused on making sure our facilities are in compliance, and we take this work so seriously that we have 2 major meetings, but one, a big picture, long-term focus on fuels management, including defensible space, and one that happens weekly, designed to be more of an emergency meeting because we see this as an emergency dealing with fuels. And it's more task-oriented, accomplishing this work on a weekly basis with updates. So we've been doing lots of work around defensible space, around fuels management, and have been very successful with the work that we've accomplished. I'm going to pass to Chris, or to the next slide is activities planned for next year. Or not slide, but same slide.
Yep. So kind of piggybacking on what Chief said. So if you haven't picked up the groups that I'm responsible for, are construction and maintenance groups. So we play a role in renovations and replacement and maintenance of items. And we have completed a number of projects in the last few years, including sprinklers, installations at structures in our Rada residence at Anthony Chabot and Shadow Cliffs. We've also replaced roof systems at Sibley, going from a combustible material cedar to a standing seam metal. One of the things that we've done too is changed our specification and material selection, so it's fire hardened, going with things like cementitious sidings and standing seam metal roofs. For next year, we also have a plan to replace our Coal Canyon roof for our swim complex, which is a cedar roof as is, and further looking at reviewing Zone 0, like Chief said, for our occupied buildings.
An additional partnership, park operations plays a role in the defensible space, and especially with Zone 0. Since 2023, our staff have adapted to take on a little bit more of the maintenance around our facilities. And so we're integrating those maintenance practices to be able to ensure that Zone 0 is a standard at our facilities. Coal Canyon was one of the first examples where we're able to remove just dilapidated materials that surrounded our service yard, get rid of some of those ladder fuels. And again, the hazardous trees are part of that program as well, because if they're leaning or overhanging a facility, they are a hazard. So we're getting those removed as well. So as we continue to work with our partners in public safety, it's just going to improve over time. But the district has just over 1,400 facilities. And so it's going to be a pretty big adjustment when it comes to maintaining the 0 through 1 defensible space zones. But we're also mapping these features as well, so that, again, we are an example for our neighbors that we abut against. And then, again, putting together a plan and a system to be able to move that maintenance, on an annual basis. Yeah.
Thanks. Just to build on what Robert was saying, I think one of the things we know, we really focused on the East Bay Hills, the Oakland, Berkeley Hills with some of the fuels reduction work we've done, and obviously have extensive grazing throughout the eastern parts of the 2 counties. But as Robert mentioned, we've been working on mapping out all of the 100-foot from homes defensible space and where it overlaps our lands across the entire district. And that's something that we didn't really have a sense of before on that scale of where all that was. And one of the next steps we're working on over the coming year is figuring out what are the pieces that we're already picking up of that defensible space with our operations crews. We have so many crews out there doing so many things that we don't fully have those pieces mapped together. And so we look forward to, talking to you all as partners too in the coming year or two as we sort of get a better handle on district wide what that defensible space is and sort of how we're going to prioritize some of the pieces that we know we've missed in the past.
I mentioned strategic. Well, let me answer your first question. So yes, 100 feet from people's homes. So their property boundary adjacent to park district boundary. And just to be detailed, in some areas, it actually expands past that. So we're going as much as 200 feet. It all depends on that particular hazard that's in that area. The other question had to do with evacuation routes. So we focus on our strategic routes, which are the roads that the Park District owns. We typically own the land, but not necessarily the road systems that are connected to our land. But the road systems that are ours, we have identified strategic routes. In those areas, we focus on defensible space. So clearing vegetation adjacent to those roads. So if there is a large wildfire, the public and our employees have the ability to egress, and public safety has the ability to ingress into those areas.
Any other questions? Okay, handing over to Allison to give an update on the grazing program.
Hi. So this is action 16 about our continued the continuation of our grazing program. So livestock grazing is really important for the Park District. It is our #1 tool in reducing fine fuel loads across both counties. Our focus is conservation grazing. So it's maintaining our grasslands and the biodiversity that they house. And what I mean by that is in some particular areas in the district, like Wildcat Canyon in particular, if we removed grazing as a landscape tool, that would probably promote brush encroachment. And brush encroachment by far has a lot more fuel than the open grassland. And it really does help fire departments set up to light backfires or be able to work on the ground versus aerial in our grazed landscapes. Next slide. So just an overview. Currently, we're grazing about 84,000 acres. We have over 45 grazing tenants, 67 grazing licenses. We have the largest grazing program in the Bay Area. We want to maintain this program again because it has immense conservation benefits, as well as those cows eating the grasses that are dry on the landscape. And we will increase our grazing acreage as we have future land acquisitions. Typically, our land acquisitions have grazing as a land use activity. And that's all I have.
Okay. Our last action item. Matt?
Okay, thanks again. So I did touch on this when I talked about the fine scale vegetation map earlier. So we are looking at developing more standards for fire tolerant vegetation and identifying the correct species for these areas. And we also have several projects that are ongoing now. There was a large fire within eucalyptus grove at Crockett Hills several years ago. And in that area, when we looked at that, there was a grove of eucalyptus that had been maintained in the early 90s and then allowed to completely regrow. And then when it caught on fire about 3 years ago, it was a very intense fire and did get close to some communities. So when we took a look at that afterwards, we decided it would be best in that area to do a full type conversion. And so to remove the eucalyptus and then convert it back to a more oak woodland with more grassland, a mix within that area. So that's one of our active projects. The estimated cost here is really refers to some funding we have identified in our Measure FF that we have funding that it's identified that we can utilize to develop some of these and implement some of these projects within the Measure FF area. The project I was just talking about at Crockett Hills is actually not in that Measure FF area, but we did that work with other grant funding and other funding from our general fund to implement that restoration project. But we're looking to identify other areas, and we have got some other small projects identified on this list. Some grassland restoration we're doing at Sibley to really knock back some of the brush and reestablish more grassland habitat there. Let's see, and we've also doing some work similar at Point Pinole. We've done some eucalyptus removal. In that area where we've done removal, it's really to also support monarch butterflies. but then also to create more habitat for them adjacent to these eucalyptus forests. And we've done several other small projects with the native vegetation at Brushy Peak and others. But we're continuing to look for opportunities and partnering with our fire department as we remove vegetation and looking for ways we can just add vegetation to help reduce fire risk by creating shaded fuel breaks. And so we're looking for additional opportunities, and we do have, like I said earlier, funding identified for these types of projects if they're in that Measure FF area.
Any questions? Okay, moving on to just highlight our funding strategies going forward.
All right. So the grants department works collaboratively with the divisions across the district to identify projects and what the funding gaps are, what the funding strategy needs to be. As there are, there's Measure WW, FF has been mentioned, and then just general funds and how those all can come together to meet the funding gap, and then grants will fill in the rest. So we are active submitting applications, securing, managing those grant contracts. I think right now we have around 180 active grants that we're in one state or another managing. The upcoming pot of money that most of you are probably familiar with, heard about, is Prop 4. That's the climate bond. Those funds are still waiting to get metered out to different grant agencies like Coastal Conservancy, Wildlife Conservation Board, CAL FIRE, so they can put those into their grant programs, and then we can go after and apply for it. So that's where we're anticipating being able to get funding for a lot of what we've just been kind of talking about today. What I wanted to highlight here on this slide is, and Kari has already been kind of talking about this, but the current grant funding that we have specifically for wildfire mitigation, this is funding that's going towards the projects that he's been outlining that we're hitting this year and in the next couple of years. And I'll just kind of reiterate that a big focus for at least wildfire mitigation is finding funds that will go towards maintenance work. So we've done, the fire department has done a lot of initial treatments over the last several years, but and that's typically what agencies want to fund, is initial treatments. But we need funding to maintain that. So CAL FIRE has been expanding their funding criteria to allow for that kind of thing. So, which is great, and same for Coastal Conservancy. So that's an area that we've identified for a need, is funding for the maintenance. Yeah, I think that's it for my slide, but make sure nothing else. No. Okay, great.
Okay, and also just to piggyback on what Katie was saying, we do have, as part of our annual budget process, we have a dedicated funding for fuels management. It started at this next year going into 2026 is 1.5 million of our, or 1.6 million of our general fund. We add 100,000 every year, and that's specifically for fuels management work. So moving into the two areas where we identified proposed revisions to the mitigation actions, as we talked about in the ingress and egress routes, we had just identified that the entire road and trails network as that scope of work, but really want to refine that to pinpoint that our strategic fire routes are approximately 350 miles. Then on the vehicle, as Chris talked about, we would like to revise the scope of work for action item 6 to remove the target for engine downsizing as it's obsolete, and move towards increased vehicle replacement target for improved fuel mileage to 101 vehicles. So those are the two proposed revisions that we are asking for in this update of the plan. The next steps for the plan is we'll publish this draft annual report on our website as well as the recording of this meeting, and open that up for public comment until mid-October. And then we will present our annual report to our board of directors for approval on December 2nd. So that's the process. That's today's update. And then looking forward to the future, our next plan update is will be in 2027. And we're already moving forward with submitting a grant to Cal OES to assist us in that next plan update. And we'll be reaching out and involving all of you as we go forward in developing that plan. So thank you for your participation. If you have any other final comments or questions or suggestions for us, we're open. Okay. Well, thank you for attending. We really appreciate you guys. Okay. Thanks all.